Howdy, howdy. Good morning to all the enthusiastic people in the room and all the ones watching at home in their pajamas. And yes, all the ones in the room are kind of jealous just a little bit. And some of the ones at home are jealous of the ones in the room, so mutual jealousy going on. Today we're finishing our series, which was not supposed to happen, which just happened, called Faith in George Floyd. I was like, I need to do a message on it 3 weeks ago, so I did a message on it, and I finished that message. And my feeling and my spirit, and as I talked to him, was like, okay, that was a start. We need more. And so we came back the next week and talked some more, and we come back this week, and hopefully this is the last one in the series. Jess is supposed to speak on the new series starting next week, so she's really hoping that I can finish this week and move on. And I figure if this one doesn't end it, nothing will, because this week is the one that's going to get me hung. Why did the white guy cross the road? And last week we went through the Good Samaritan. We went through that parable. We went through it carefully. We're going to go back through it again this week, really a totally different way. Because let's just read it, and I'll explain why we can go right back through the same thing again. A guy walks up to Jesus. They have a little conversation about who gets to go to heaven. And the sum result is you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. Love your Lord your God with everything you got, and love your neighbor as yourself. And the dude, wanting to justify himself, said, who's my neighbor? How small can I make the circle of my neighborhood? How small can my neighborhood be, is what he's asking. And in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, who was the lowest form of human life in their perspective as Jews in that time frame, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. And Jesus asked the question, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. So Jesus told him, go and do likewise. And the question I would ask is, last week, we summed this whole thing up and said, in reality, what Jesus is saying is Jesus is exploding their view of neighbors. And basically, Jesus is saying, you can't narrow the list of who are your neighbors. I want you to think that every person you walk by who has a need is your neighbor. Anybody who comes into your life, anyone who's in your sphere of influence who has a need, that person is your neighbor. Why didn't he just say that? Why didn't Jesus just give us the principle that he wants us to get? Even when the story's over, he doesn't then say, so therefore, whoever you run into who needs your help, that's your neighbor. Why didn't Jesus do that? Because stories have a different kind of power over us. Stories work through us. As you read one of Jesus' stories, especially this one, but frankly, most of them, I'm always, without even trying, without even thinking about it, I'm going, who am I in this story? Which person is me? There's a part of me going, boy, I hope I'm not the priest or the Levite. There's a part of me that wants to say I'm the Samaritan, but there's a bigger part of me saying, I don't know if I would live up to that standard or not, and so I am aspiring to that. There's a part of me that even goes, am I ever the person in the ditch? Am I ever the one who's standing there, laying there in great need? That story makes us go at these principles in a totally different way. And it also allows us to ask questions like, why did the priest cross the road? Why did the Levite comes along, sees the person laying in the ditch, cross the road? Why didn't they help? It's a perfectly valid question to ask if there's a story. And it makes me examine myself. It makes me look at myself. It takes this thing to a whole different level than Jesus simply saying, take care of everybody. I know they were Jewish, but why did the white guys cross the road and the Samaritan didn't? I'll tell you, one thing we forget. We are insanely rational creatures. Everything we do, if we're not reacting in the moment in extreme emotion, we are always acting in a way we believe is rational, aren't we? We always are thinking through things so that our response is always rational. Matter of fact, the worse we're acting, the more rational we become. If you bust a kid doing something wrong, they go one of two ways, don't they? One way is they go all emotional, I'm so sorry. The second is they go lawyer. Right? And they start laying out the reasons why what they did was the appropriate response. Isn't that the truth? See, when we act in a way that seems rational but isn't right, it's called rationalization. And I have no doubt, although I know they were fictional characters, but Jesus wants us to play this game with his story. If you had talked to the priest after he passed the person laying in the ditch, the priest would probably not have been defensive. He probably would have given you very good logical reasons why he passed by on the other side. And if you caught the Levite 15 minutes later after he got to his home, say, did you see that guy on the road? Why didn't you do him? He would give you very logical explanation as to why what he did was the right thing, even though we would say, and Jesus implied very strongly, that what he did was the wrong thing. So, why am I bringing this up now? And let me just be straight up. A significant percentage of our brothers and sisters are laying in the ditch right now in pain. They are hurt and they are angry and they are confused and they are upset. And many, many of us are walking by on the other side of the street. We're crossing the road and looking at them and walking right past. And I am, in case you hadn't noticed, white. And I relate most to that because that's who I am. That's how I grew up. Okay? Most people listening to me in any situation are probably going to be white. If you are of color during this time, recognize this will apply to you too, because all of us have a tendency when we see somebody in the ditch to figure out a reason why we should walk past. But the reality is, I've got friends that are hurting real bad. I've got good friends that are hurting real bad. And I've got other friends that are making their pain worse instead of making it better. And I want us to talk about how not to do that anymore. I want us to talk about why we do what we do, how rational we make it sound, and why we need to be the people who are stopping and helping, not crossing the other side of the road. Ed Stetzer put it this way: we should be grieved. We have reached a place where so many in the African American community believe their lives do not matter to us. And make no mistake, the majority of the time, I'm not talking about some organization, I'm talking about individuals. The majority of the time, when an African American person or any person of color puts hashtag Black Lives Matter, they're not doing it for any reason except they really want you to affirm that you believe that to be true. They are saying from their hearts, I am hurting because I do not believe you believe that my life matters. Because as I look at the world around me, the message that I get from this world is that most people don't think my life matters. That it does not matter at the level of other people. That's what's being said. It's not rational, it's emotional. I'm not saying it's irrational, but it's primarily an emotional response of a person who is laying in the ditch in pain and in anger and in anguish. That is what is being said, and so many of us are replying back. What? What are we saying back to this person who's hurting? And let me say this right up front. I'm going to put it this way. And can I just apologize up front too? I'm going to tell you this right up front. I've said I'm white. I am walking in a dangerous place for me, and I know that, and I will say things wrong at some point. Matter of fact, I was getting emails last night at 11:30 on how I should phrase certain things. And I will mess up. Okay, during the course of this time, I am going to say something that's not the right way to say it, and I'm asking your forgiveness before I start. Okay, that I am coming, I hope, from the right place in my heart, and if this white boy from Clay, West Virginia doesn't phrase it the way that is considered correct right now, it's coming from the right place. It may not come out the mouth right. So just give me, if I could ask for blanket immunity before we start, I would appreciate it. But I'm going to do my best to say this as well as I can say this. But we, and that's all of us, need to assure African Americans that they do matter, we do care, and we want justice not to be a dream from some speech in the 1960s, but the norm for their lives. Okay, so let's get back to our priest and our Levite. We'll start with the Levite. Levite's walking down the road. He looks over. There's a guy in a ditch. What's he think? Here's one thing he might think, and I see people thinking a lot and expressing a lot. He looked at that guy and said, he should have known better. It's his fault. He's the one walking down this dangerous street with money in his pockets. He's the one who looks like he's got stuff. He was the one out here by himself. He's the one, and we say that too. We say the victim probably deserved it. They deserved it. Every time. Every time. As soon as one happens, the posts start. Here's why that person deserved it. It makes me think, by the way, immediately of a rape victim, because what's the defense for that too? Oh, she was asking for it. Did you see how she was dressed? Hopefully you don't buy that crap. Hopefully you're not buying that about some young woman who happens to be wearing a pair of short shorts and gets raped and saying that she deserved it somehow because of the way she acted. Well, quit going there with everything else. Let me give you I'm going to give you a quiz, and if it offends you, I'm almost close to halfway sorry. But I want us to recognize where our rationalization comes from and where it goes. I want us to understand how we're glossing over the pain of others in our rationalization. Let me just give you a list. Let me say their names. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, John Crawford, Philando Castillo. Chances are, if you're white like me, you'd have to Wikipedia about half of these. If you're African American, you don't need to. You know them, you know the stories. Now, if you look at that list and you find one or two on there and say, you know what, in the situation, they kind of maybe had something to play with it, okay. If you look at all six of them and immediately start finding excuses why it was okay that they died, you might be a person who's falling into that trap of when you see somebody in the ditch immediately saying they deserved it and crossing the street because, well, they should never have been there to start with. Can I give you something, though? Let me just say this flat out. For every single one of those people who died, grief is always an appropriate response to death. 100% of the time, grief is the appropriate response to death. If the worst human being in the world dies, it is not wrong to grieve that person. It is fully acceptable to grieve that person. I did a Facebook post on it, which worked real well because I got feedback from both sides of the equation on George Floyd. And my thing was, I'm grieving this man. I read the stories about what he did in Houston to try to help with guys who were planting churches. I'm a church planter. I see that. I know he was struggling with his demons right up until the moment he died. I know he was human, and he was as flawed as any human that we all come. That's the only flavor we come in, is flawed. And some of us have better success fighting our demons than others. But anytime a person dies, it's okay to grieve. It's the appropriate response. And speaking again as a white person, when my African American friends are grieving the death of another African American, I have no right to tell them their grief is invalid. There is no justification for me looking at a person who's hurting and saying, you are not allowed to hurt that way over that person. Who the heck am I to tell somebody when they can grieve? See, we're messing something up. As soon as we do that, we're messing something up. We're starting to let it feed in that we're supposed to help the people who deserve to be helped and not help the people who don't deserve to be helped, like that ever occurs. See, here's the deal. We help people because they're made in the image of God, not because they deserve to be helped. That's our motivation. My motivation for helping somebody is that person is in the image of God, same as I am. They have demons similar to my demons. They have problems similar, maybe not exactly the same, but they suffer from the same thing that I suffer from, in that is a fallen creature living in a fallen world, doing their best to just get through it. And Paul gave us a really interesting analogy on that. And he was talking about something very specific, but the principle in it is something that applies all over the place. And he was talking about when Christianity first moved into the Roman world, most people who were not Jewish worshiped idols. That was just normal. It was as normal as anything that was part of their lives. And there was food that was sacrificed to those idols, and that food that was sacrificed to those idols was then sold in the marketplace at a greatly reduced cost, and you could buy that meat, and you could eat it, and you could have a good steak for a lot less than it would normally cost. And some people went up to those bazaars and looked at that meat and were like, I can't eat that. It was sacrificed to an idol. And other people went up and said, those idols are nothing. They're just rock and stone and gold, or they're nothing. They're just statues. I can eat that meat and save some money. And there was an argument going forth about it, going back and forth. And Paul said this: if you are hurting others by the food you eat, you are not guided by love. Don't let your appetite destroy someone Christ died for. In 1 Corinthians, he said the same basic thing. So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. Now, what's going on? The weak brother or sister is the one who grew up in a temple worshiping another god and believing that God was real. And when they got to the meat, they could not escape the fact that their reality, that their history was that idol was a real thing. And eating that meat was them moving back into their former lives. And so they couldn't eat it. They couldn't do it. It was too rough for them. That was too dangerous. Okay? But I want you to understand, what's the basic principle there? The principle, because how many of you have trouble with eating meat sacrificed to idols? Anybody got a challenge in that area? No. Nobody. So why even read it? Why is it even in the Bible? Because here's what dealing with weaker brothers and sisters is all about. It's understanding that we all have different histories and allowing for those differences in the way we treat others. Paul is getting on to the person who does not have a problem with idols Eating meat in defiance of the other person. In other words, saying your story's not valid is what they're saying. What the ones who had all the freedom and the liberty in Christ were saying is, your story is not a valid story, so therefore I don't have to take it into account in the way that I treat you. You should just get over this whole idol thing. You just need to get past that. Can you see how that applies? We had a group come in, and we did a little panel discussion a number of years ago on the issue of race and police activities and things like that. And the thing that I learned the most, to me it was like, this is my cool revelation. What do I do if I get pulled over? And what they said was, if you get pulled over, put your hands on your wheel and wait for the policeman to come. Don't go dig it, because I'm in a hurry, so I want to go ahead and dig out my driver's, get all my information ready so I can give him real fast so I can get on the road again. That's my thought process. And I thought, this is cool because I don't want to scare the policeman. That's not what everybody thinks. I was researching for this message, and I read, this guy wrote this, younger African-American guy in his probably 40s. He said, issued along with my driver's license came parental guidance with police. Survive the encounter, worry about your rights and liberty later. I didn't get that speech. Did you get that speech? I didn't get that speech. Never crossed anybody's mind to give me that speech. There's a huge part of our population that gets that speech. They were told that when they got their driver's license. If you get pulled over, your goal is to survive this encounter. Now, I know, I hear you, I hear your brain clicking, and statistics are flowing, and the reasons, the logic is flowing out. And it doesn't matter whether you agree with this as being realistic or not, it is their story. And let me point to the most important thing about this piece of information. The most important thing about that quote is the last two words right here in the bottom. National Review. National Review is, in my opinion, the most balanced, conservative opinion source out there. This is not some left-wing, radical left. These guys are ultra-conservative. These guys have posters of Ronald Reagan all over their building. This is an African American who writes for National Review, whose parents were college educated, whose background would be very similar to mine except for the color of his skin, and they told him that when he got his license, and he, from the best I could tell from the article, will tell his children the same thing. And let me put it up front. It doesn't matter if you don't think that's true. I think it is. I mean, I'm looking at, was it Castilla? He worked in the school system. One of the guys that was on my list earlier, someone who was killed. He worked in the school system in food services, had a tenure, had been promoted, and had been pulled over 40 times in 13 years for things like broken tail lights, stuff like that. 40 times in 13 years. I thought it was really cool when they told me about the thing about putting my hands up here. That was 5 years ago, I believe, give or take. You know how many times I've been pulled over in the past 5 years? 0. Do I ever drive like I need to be pulled over? No. Never. I don't know. I've never lived in that world, but I don't have the right to deny that they do. And I don't have the right to tell them their story's not valid. And if that's their story, I don't have the right to say you can't live that. And Paul continues on that. Honor the person's story. Honor their history with this line. He says, so if I hurt one of the Lord's followers by what I eat, I will never eat meat again as long as I live. Or to bring it back to our other story, I don't care what the person in the ditch did to get there. My job is to get them out, not challenge how they got there. Okay, let's go to the priest. The Levite said they deserved it. The priest comes by and goes, you know, I would have helped, but seriously, it would just encourage other people to do the same thing. People need to know this road is dangerous. They need to know to stay off of this road. If I help that person, the next person is going to come along and they're going to get in trouble too. So I didn't help because I don't want to contribute to the problem. In other words, it's not going to fix the real problem. I'm not concerned about that person in the ditch because my job is to fix the real problem. I mean, I even talk about this stuff, how important it is to fix the real problem. But at some level, the real problem is people are hurting. Now, I got to stand up for this one because it got me in a special place. Because I was reading art. I shouldn't tell you this. I have spent more time in preparation for this message than probably any message in my life, and I was tweaking things as I came in the door. I don't mean the door to the building today. I mean I came downstairs and tweaked something before I walked up here. And one of the articles I read was one of these let's rationalize the whole thing away article, and it was coming from this perspective. We got to fix the real problem. And they made a very good argument for the idea that a huge part of the problem in our inner city communities is the breakdown of the American family. That there aren't enough fathers actively engaged in the lives of people. And that contributes to a lot of the problem. And that was their summary conclusion was the problem isn't what everybody on this side is saying, the problem is the family. And I'm not going to argue with them that that's not a huge, huge part of the problem. The problem was, as soon as they said that, the problem is there aren't enough fathers active in the African American community. Their response was, so it's not my problem. And they walked away. And I'm going, you know, that's so true because the Bible never says anything about the fact that we have a responsibility for people who don't have fathers. It would be different if the Bible spoke about what we should do for people who had fathers. Like it would be really cool if Psalm 82 verse 3 said, defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. It would be really cool if the prophet Isaiah, the most important prophet in the Old Testament, had said, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless. I've jumped 2 times in 3 weeks. Plead the widow's cause. Now, a lot of your translations, when they come to this, they put the word orphan in there. That's not the best of my knowledge, that's not the literal word. The literal word is fatherless. And there's a huge reason for that. Because in those days, the breadwinner was the father. And if the father died, it really, from a pure am I going to eat or not perspective, it really having a mother was not the big do-all and end-all. If they were fatherless, they were in trouble whether the mother was alive or not. So in the Old Testament, it frequently, normally, it will, instead of saying orphan, both parents are dead, will say the father's dead because they've lost all that comes with having a father. And the Bible is very clear. Our job, if somebody's in the ditch because they're lacking a father, is not to walk to the other side of the stinking road and say it's their fault. When the heck did it ever become anybody's fault they were lacking a father? Whenever in history have we blamed the orphan because their parents died? I'm sorry if I'm yelling, but I'm pissed at a church nationally which yells at people for being orphans, yells at them for being abandoned, mistreats them because there's nobody loving them enough and they go down bad paths. What would I be without my parents? I have no idea, but it wouldn't be this. Would not be this. How dare you blame somebody for being an orphan? How dare you blame somebody because their father abandoned them? How dare you blame them because their mom wasn't some ideal? It's not their fault. What are you going to do about it? We'll walk to the other side of the road. I'm going to go, glad that's not my problem. Look at the streets and look at the news. It is my problem. Well, it's not like the church has anything to do about how to make families work. Thinking, we need to find a church somewhere in the inner city, Fayetteville, somewhere like that, or somewhere that has this problem and say, hey, you know what? We're not the Great White Hope. We can't fix all your problems, but maybe we can help with some of these kids who don't have fathers. It happened. Kim was going through some new stuff and saw that somewhere in this area, somebody put racist graffiti on a church. And because I'm trying to quit being the person who walks the other side of the road, I messaged the pastor and said, hey, you want to have coffee? Maybe instead of being upset, I can help. Maybe I can find some way to do that. Maybe some of us know some young boy especially who's growing up without a father. Maybe we can step in and do something. Maybe. I mean, James says this, if a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good's that? Oh, see, they need fathers. Be warm and well fed. That's helpful. Bottom line, we're called to address real needs, not argue about possible solutions. We're called to find something and do it. We sit around, and this guy, we sit around in our nice suburban homes, and we complain about people who don't have half what we have. And so many of us aren't doing a darn thing to help. No wonder. When somebody says hashtag Black Lives Matter, they think we don't believe that. Okay, I'm going to be easier on all of us with the last one because I think this is the root one. I really think this is the root. I think this is the root rationalization, and the other ones grow out of it. Because, I'll be honest, I mean, like I haven't been being honest. The word racism gets thrown around a lot, and it gets defined in such a way that everybody's a racist, and I believe a definition that includes everybody is not a definition. A definition that makes everybody something is not defining anything. Definition means I'm cutting people out. And if I've got a definition that everybody is this, and if I've got a definition that says everybody that's white's a racist, then I haven't defined it at all. If I've got a definition that says every human's a racist, I'm not saying that most of us don't have tendencies and things we need to overcome. I'm not saying we don't have biases and blind spots, but I know hardly any racists. And I know somebody's going to yell at me and say, oh, Steve, no, I don't mean that. I'm not saying I don't know people have blind spots. I have blind spots. I'm not saying we don't have biases. I have biases. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about I know hardly anybody who actually dislikes people who are different, who dislikes black people. I know hardly anybody who fits that category, and I mean by hardly anybody, I mean I know one or two people. Of the thousands of people that I know a handful that are actively racist, that actually hate people who are different than them. But I know lots of us, most of us, maybe all of us, every human has blind spots and biases. I'm not going to use the word racist on that because I think it weakens the term. It takes the term and makes it not powerful enough. I want to keep that term alive and use it for people who are actively stupid idiots, okay? Instead of for just everybody. Does that make sense okay? And I don't think most of us want to hurt anybody. I don't think most people, now this grows the group of idiots. I don't think most people that I know are walking to the other side of the road because they really think that person needs to hurt. I don't think they do that. I don't know those. I know some of those people. I don't know very many of those people. But here's what I think probably really happened with the priest and the Levite. Really happened in a fictional story, but this is how I tell the story that Jesus told. Is the priest walks by and he sees the guy on the road and he's in bad shape. He's really hurting. I mean, the guy in the ditch isn't just, it's not just emotional. He is beat, he is bleeding, he looks like he's dying. And I think the most likely answer is the priest looks at the guy and says, I have no idea how I could help that person. I got nothing. I don't have medical training. I don't have anything on me that I could use. I don't have a first aid kit with me. I don't have a donkey that I can put him on the back of. I look at him and I don't know where I would start. And so he walked to the other side of the road. And then what we do is, and I think that's most of us. I think most of us come to a problem the size of the problem that we see in America, and we look at that person in the ditch, and we haven't got a clue. And we walk to the other side of the road, and once we get to the other side of the road, after we've decided we're not going to do anything, we then go back to the other things to rationalize it, because we don't want to just admit I'm clueless. That doesn't sound so a lot of, I'm not a lot of people, but a lot of people then I'm hoping a lot of people who are throwing out these other things are doing it because they don't know what to do. And I think that's the number one thing. I don't know what to do. This problem's too crazy big for me. I'm going to give you two things. I'll try to do this real quickly. Two things in response, instead of saying, I don't know what to do. Number one, find something you can do and invest yourself in it. Find something you can do and invest yourself in it. Find something that matters, even if it matters this much. And invest. You're not going to fix this problem. I'm not going to fix this problem. I mean, I know people don't like to hear this, but this is a societal problem. It's a societal level problem, and I don't have the skill set, the ability, the voice that's loud enough or anything to solve a societal level problem. I don't. But I can find something that I can do. I can message the pastor of the church who gets graffiti sprayed on his thing. I can do a lot of the things we're trying to do in Johnsonville. I can help that one neighbor. I've got both sides of me. My neighbors are African American, and I get it. The feeling there are a couple people in the neighborhood who don't treat them very well, and I can treat them well. Find something I can do and invest in it, because you know what that does? That changes you. I mean, I quote this all the time because it's so true. Wherever your treasure is, there desires of your heart will be also. The reason you don't have any desire to help people is because you're not helping people. The reason I don't have a desire to help people is because I'm not helping them. The reason I don't want to help people in a certain community is because I'm not invested in that community. And I don't say this to be at all negative toward our church. It's just a reality. A lot of our people have a much greater investment in Phnom Penh than in Fayetteville. A much more heart for Phnom Penh than we do for Fayetteville. Because a lot of us have invested a lot in Phnom Penh, in Cambodia, in human trafficking. So therefore our heart's there, which is good. But you need to find ways to get your heart anywhere you see the problem that you can do something about. So find something you can do and invest in it. And then lastly, and this is I think it's the spiritual one, I apologize, but I think it's a big one. Become a Galatians 5 person. Let me just show you what I mean by that. We'll just read just a little bit of it. Because Paul in Galatians 5, he starts out by naming the bad stuff people do. And I've just sort of whittled the list down to get the stuff you may see around you sometimes. The acts of the flesh are obvious. Hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambitions, dissensions, factions, and envy. See any of that? Do you see any of that around you right now? Could you classify your Facebook posts that you see people making into this category? Dissensions, factions, fits of rage, jealousy, discord. Yeah. We got enough of this. We don't need any more. Don't need any more of this. We need the next line. You know this. The fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. That's what we need. We need Christians to step up and say, I'm going to be that. When I see somebody in the ditch, I'm going to be that. When I see somebody hurting, I'm going to be that. When I see brothers and sisters in Christ in pain, I'm going to be that. I'm going to let that permeate me. I'm going to let it work through me. Earlier in Galatians, before he said that, he said this: for you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters. You're called to be free. You're not responsible for everything, but don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. What did the Samaritan do when he walked past the person in the ditch? Served that person in love. Serve one another in love. Okay? For the whole law, this is almost ironic. For the whole law can be summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Does that phrase sound familiar to you? Of course you know love your neighbor as yourself. Where did you just hear that word? There was a religious leader who came up to Jesus and said, Jesus, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? Ringing a bell? And Jesus says, what do you read? What does it say to you? And the guy says, well, it says to love the Lord with everything I've got and to love my neighbor as myself. But wishing to justify himself, he said, who is my neighbor? And Jesus said, anybody you find in a ditch. Right now, I have friends that are in a ditch and they're hurting. And if you're one of my friends and you're watching online and you're hurting, I'm sorry for your pain. And I'm not going to try to justify it, and I'm not going to try to reason it away. I'm not going to tell you it's invalid. I'm not going to tell you shouldn't feel what you feel. I'm not going to tell you your pain isn't real, and I'm not going to tell you your anger is justified. I'm not going to tell you your anger is not justified. I'm going to tell you that I want to feel your pain with you, that I want to come alongside you in that ditch, that I want to love you, and I want to be part of the solution to make this world a place where you don't have to go visit that ditch every few months because it happens again. I didn't solve a lot. But folks, if we'll just say that, it'll help a lot. If we'll just mean that, it'll help a lot. If we'll just live that, it will help a lot. Because that's what Jesus taught, that's what Jesus modeled, that's what Jesus lived. Jesus came alongside people who were in the ditch, and he loved them. And we were all in a ditch, right? We were all in the ditch of sin. We're all doomed to hell. We're all doomed to life without God. And Jesus comes alongside of us, and then he takes all of our sins to the cross, and he dies for every one of them. And he didn't say, well, he deserved it, she deserved it, because that was true. I did deserve it. And he still died for me. We never go without saying this. If you'd like to have the relationship with the Christ who lives that way, who loves that way, pick up one of these. If you're in the auditorium, pick up one of the blue bags on the corner of the platform or some on the back table. We'll line you up with somebody that talked about it. If you're online, you want to talk to somebody about how to have that relationship with Christ, just email steve@spoutsprings.org. Easiest way to do it. I'll connect you with somebody, and we'll talk about how to get you lined up so you can have that relationship with Christ. If you want to be part of a community that thinks part of our job is to look at people who are hurting and scream at the top of our voices, we love you, that we're going to try to find things and do things that matter and do what we can, you announce being part of this motley group by being baptized. If you want to be baptized, let us know. We'll figure something out. We have the technology. We can figure out a way to baptize people during a coronavirus. This is not that hard. We've done harder. If you're in the auditorium, you want to pray, we've got a cross over in the corner. If you want to take communion, it's over there. If you're at home and you want to take a moment and pray, find a quiet place in your house. I know that might be a challenge for some of you. Try to find a quiet place in your house to take a minute or two to pray. If you want to take communion, God's not going to be upset if you take some stuff out of your fridge and make your own communion. We have one calling in this SIDS. Don't cross the road. When we walk along and we find somebody in the ditch, our calling is never cross the road. Never cross the road. Father, forgive me for how often I've crossed the road. Forgive this white guy for how many times I've seen people hurting and cross the road. Forgive me. Father, I want to do better. I want to live better. I want to love better. Father, I want to be like that stinking Samaritan who, even though everybody would have told him he owed that guy nothing, who didn't cross the road, who did kneel down, who did help, who did love. Help me to be that person in my life. Father, show me the people around me that are hurting who need me. And Father, while I can't change the world, help me to change my part of it. In Jesus' name, amen.